Baldur's Gate 3 came out pretty recently, and it's been a game that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I never played the early access for it or anything while waiting for the full release, and after I completed it once, I wanted to make the second run a little more challenging. Unlike Larian Studios' previous CRPGs, Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, there's nothing like a lone wolf feat in Baldur's Gate 3, so I wanted to see if I could beat the game with just a single party member. Additionally, besides only using one character for the entire run, I decided to set some other ground rules. Number 1, I have to play on Tactician mode. Number 2, no abusing the flee mechanic to win fights. Number 3, any summons or temporary companions are okay to use. And number 4, the run ends when I defeat the final boss of Act 3. With that out of the way, let's see how the run actually went. First things first, going into the character creation, we choose to start as a Githyanki because they have access to a daily enhanced jump and invisibility, both of which I only remembered existed maybe 2 or 3 times in the whole run. We then choose the Monk class, which starting from level 4 grants us the ability to punch hard enough to kill God. We'll also be playing as the Dark Urge for reasons that I'll explain later. Next, we create a proper edgelord in order to match the many questionable decisions we'll be making in the story, hit the randomize button a bunch on the Guardian creation section, and with that we're ready to start our adventure. Our first decision comes in the form of whether or not we want to become a physician and do open brain surgery on our first day. As a monk, I'm somewhat of a certified doctor, so I give this guy's brain a little hug, and no, he's dead. Shortly afterwards, we meet up with everyone's favorite character, Ethel, a fellow Githyanki who we then move as far away from us as possible in the following fight so that she doesn't get targeted by any of the enemies. We punch a couple of evil-looking impy boys into a red paste and then give Ethel a free skydiving lesson without a parachute. Rip. We pass by the brain shed of Shadowheart and immediately go into the next fight. For this encounter, all we need to actually do is rush ourselves to the far end of the map and click the transponder to trigger the end of the battle, and then that's the end of the prologue. The ship we were on, called the Nautiloid, crashes to the surface and we wake up on a beach. We then menacingly approach this half-elf lady who, strangely enough, doesn't take too kindly to us, and starts attacking us as soon as we disregard her safety concerns. We're left with no choice but to kill her and steal her mystical floating orb thing. We make our way to some more brainy boys, sneaking up on them to get a surprise attack bonus, which basically gives us a free turn. Then soon afterwards, we're met with another elf who smells a little bit like moldy blood, so we tell him he stinks, and the guy suddenly tackles us. We're then left with no choice but to take him out. We find Squidward under some debris and give him his final vacation from Bikini Bottom, and then meet up with a mysterious hand in a portal named Gale. But if I've learned anything from public bathrooms, it means that a hand coming from a hole in the wall means stranger danger, and it needs to be cut off. After that, we hit level 2, tell some random bandits to skedaddle away from a crypt we're going to be visiting later, and finally we reach the entrance of the Druid Grove, where some goblins are attacking some funny mercenary fellas and tieflings. The battle mostly revolves around punching some goblins that are attacking me, and letting the rest of the tieflings and mercenaries take out the remaining goblins. With that battle done, we head on into the Druid Grove, where the dialogue glitches out and we end up punching Zevlor with a natural 20, knocking him unconscious. Take that, I guess. If we were a higher level, he'd be dead. We do a little bit of shopping and selling, tell some tieflings to run away like cowards, and meet one of the most important characters for the build we're going for, Auntie Ethel. Ethel sells 3 elixirs of hill giant strength per long rest, and makes it extremely easy to stockpile enough to last the entire game. These elixirs set our strength to 21 until long rest, which when taken with the Tavern Brawler feat at level 4 makes Monk do some insane damage even early on. After soliciting the neighborhood grandma for performance enhancing elixirs, we make our way to harass the druids of the grove. As soon as we make contact with the head druid, through absolutely no fault of our own, they let this random child get bitten by a snake and die to death. We head to the back of the grove to grab Kaga's journal from a chest and tell the tiefling kid's parents their kid died of natural causes. After that, we make our way to the local prison to plot with a goblin and release it because she promises to take us to their leader. After some minor inconveniences, we escort the goblin out and start to make our way towards the goblin camp. On the way there, we talk to some random absolutists in the wild so that we can take their dying brother's brainworm for ourselves. Soon after, we hit level 3 and take the way of the 4 elements specialization. We meet some more goblins, take some bombs from the windmill cellar, meet some more goblins, meet even more goblins that brand us, save Volo from some goblins, and tell Minthara we'll attack the Druid Grove together. We also get our back broken by a crazy cleric for a permanent buff that activates underneath 30% HP. Before doing the Druid Grove fight, I wasn't sure if it would cause issues if Ethel was still in the camp, so I headed over to the swamp to partially complete the hag quest. After talking to Ethel and making sure that she was in her hag hut, I went back to Priestess Gut in the goblin camp, mainly because I wanted to get her creepy crawly brain slug. After going through her dialogue, we get imprisoned by her in the basement. There's a couple skill checks that you can do to break free, but I ended up failing both of the checks, and if that happens, Corilla just comes over and kills Gut and her ogre for you. At the time I had no idea this happened, so it was extremely convenient. From Gut's basement, I made my way into the Underdark to grab the waypoint. This then prompts Raphael's stupid smug ass to appear. At that moment I declared I was going to kick his pompous ass in 2 acts. Raphael then runs away because he's very scared of me, and then I grab the Underdark waypoint. I then went into the crypt from the beginning of the act, and snuck around clearing the bandits in there. I also fought a couple skeletons before realizing Withers, the guy who gives you the ability to respec in this game, wasn't even here. Turns out going to the Underdark made him appear in my camp before I even did his quest. We then long rest and get our very first dream visitor sequence, which is one of the steps needed for putting more brain slugs in your eyes. I don't remember if this is what enables it because I'm stupid and completely forgot to try it until later. Next thing I do is let Volo stick an ice pick in my eye because he says trust me, I'm a doctor. After getting a personal backyard lobotomy, we gain the ability to see invisible people, and head back to the Druid Grove to commit various war crimes. We act like we're on the side of the Druids until we open up the gates wide open for the righteous goblins to smite the evil Druids from the face of this plane. The battle itself mostly involves waiting around while the goblins do all the work for me. I still get a couple hits on Zevlor to make it a little faster, but as expected everything goes smoothly. After wiping out the tieflings at the gate, Minthara tells us to go into the grove and kill the rest of the tieflings with her. We head in and try to flank a group of tieflings where Will, another potential party member, is fighting, so naturally we kill him dead. After potentially both deparenting several children and de-childrening several parents, Minthara then tells us we should kill the druids too. And this fight is actually the first time that I struggled up to this point in the run. It was partially due to the fact that I completely forgot to short rest before going into the fight and I had no key left, and no key means no monk abilities. The goblins on my side in the fight pretty much all died instantly, and while watching them all die, instead of reloading and short resting, I decided to play it out. I tried to lure the druids up the hill after that where 3 exploding goblins were waiting, and whenever another enemy was keeping the druids busy, I'd use a crossbow to attack them. Eventually, after a few mid-combat reloads and some goblin explosions, I lured the rest of the druids to the goblin archers on the side, and managed to take Kaga and her crew of nature-loving child murderers down. Afterwards, I finally remembered to eat my brain slugs for extra powers. We meet back up with Minthara, and she talks us into having a party at our camp because our parents are totally out, and it would be totally tubular, dude. Unfortunately, the sick rager had a lukewarm reception due to the fact that I have no friends. Minthara then asks us if we want to shag in the shed, and by ask, I mean she basically says we have no choice.
Tonight, you are mine.
Oh god. And she also gives us a brain slug point. It's at this moment that we have enough brainy boys to give us one of the strongest abilities for the rest of the entire run, the illithid power called Cull the Weak. This thing gives us basically a psychic execute whenever an enemy goes below a certain threshold of HP. That threshold is also based on how many slugs you have in your brain, with a max of 25. The reason this is so good, especially as a solo character, is that it gives us a ton of potential for saving actions. Finishing enemies off sooner instead of having to spend another action is super valuable. We then get to our bedroll, and then Minthara makes good on our promise. After a night of questionable passion, we lay next to Minthara reading her mind, and basking in the moonlight with our new girlfriend. We start thinking, oh man, wouldn't it be crazy if we just snapped her neck? Just kidding. Oh god, what the fuck? After Ted Bundying our newest companion, we try to check up on her body to grab her brain slug, but for some reason the body had completely disappeared. I later found out this was a glitch that happened under these specific circumstances, and because of that we were down a brain slug. I also couldn't really figure out how to get past Nettie's stone wall in the Druid Grove, and didn't really bother googling it, so we were essentially down 2 brain slugs for the chapter. Oh well, no big deal. After a little while, we meet up with the best companion, Scratch, and invite him into our camp. One day, once more modding tools become available for this game, I dearly hope that Scratch becomes a playable character so that we can do dog-only runs. Then, to tie up our final companion-related loose end, we meet up with Karlach. Karlach's a little bit pissed at us for defeating the evil druids upstairs, and as a result, she does attack us. Karlach's rage turns out to be the real deal because she ends up kicking our ass a few times before we're able to take her down. After beating her, we take her head to the paladins up the hill for a sword we'll exchange for some pocket money. Assassinations really don't pay the way they used to. And with that done, we can finally be truly alone in our camp for the rest of the game. Besides Withers and Scratch, of course. Later, I meet up with a Githyanki creche in the area, which, despite being a Githyanki myself, I'm still not entirely sure what the hell that actually means. The leader, Voss, tests us by calling us a literal baby bitch, and we retort by saying no you. He's so impressed that he leaves us alone completely. We then hit level 4, and this enables us to get the Tavern Brawler feat that I mentioned earlier. I meet back up with Withers and respec into the Way of the Open Hand specialization for Monk. This combination of specialization and the Tavern Brawler feat, plus plus the use of elixirs of Hill Giant Strength essentially give us enough power to send most duelists on this plane to the Shadow Realm. I then go to the place that Kaka's journal pointed out in order to kill some Mephits and Tree Boys, and grab one of our more important pieces of equipment for Act 1. Normally these Mephits are kind of pieces of garbage, but they just so happen to gather up just enough for me to explode them all with a scroll of burning hands. Mephits also explode on death, and their death explosions caused a chain reaction, and they all kind of just died to death for the most part. After sweeping up the remaining enemies, I grabbed the Sparkling Hands, which gives us some extra lightning damage on our unarmed attacks. I then immediately headed over to the Knoll area of Act 1 to gather up their ears so that I could eat them for extreme speeds. I also headed back to the now abandoned Goblin camp to get all the smoke powder barrels. Heading back over the knolls, I prepared to fight the Knoll boss with some mercenaries by sneaking up a cliff and throwing some bombs on them. The mercenaries died, and I just started punching, and then suddenly I won. I took all the hyena ears, shoved another brain slug into my eye, and then our job was done. I figured at this point the best course of action was to go into the Underdark. I started by going to the wizard tower in the Underdark and got magic missile directly through some rocks, but thankfully I could just punch the towers all to death. We then make our way through the wizard tower, gathering a lot of the items that we're going to need for future quests. Repower the tower itself and plagiarize some poetry to convince Mr. Robot to give us the special tower ring. We then steal some scrolls from the tower's basement, and then find our way to the Mycolid camp, but on the way we have some close calls with some minotaurs. After pre-tenderizing their meat, we go to the Mycolid camp and get a special assassination request from the King Fungus, who wants us to take out some Dwergar that are downstairs. We go ahead and knock the socks off a dying poison gnome for some free boots of speed. We also stop by Mr. Krabs and Squidward to preemptively finish a quest line where he makes us drink some poison goop that accidentally makes our brain slugs pulse with even more power. On our way out, a red fungus offers to come with us to take down the Dwergar, but I refuse his advances because I'm way out of his pay grade. We then head back to camp to rest before the next battles, and at camp we're met with a Dragonborn bard, who asks for shelter and a bedroll. After insisting that she's safe with us in this desolate camp underground with no other friends in sight, we head to sleep for the night. Next thing we know, we're found T-posing over a corpse with her hands covered in blood. We stare at the corpse for just a little bit too long, a little too happily, before going back to sleep and forgetting it ever happened. We head back out, and we're ready to take on the Dwergar. We attempt to sneak up behind the Dwergar, ultimately failing to do so, and then we get caught in a battle against all of them. We start by punching the first dwarf to death immediately and throw a grenade at another one. The boss then reanimates some dead, but they don't really get involved in the fight at all, and we punch the last two dwarves and cave their skulls in like some mashed potatoes, and with that we've successfully carried out a contract killing. King Fungopop gives us some sticks or something as a reward and tells us to kill another guy named Nier, so naturally we accept his proposition. We then decided to go finish Glut's quest and take him to the corpse of the Dwergar leader, where Glut then demands that we kill King Fungus in his name. We tell Glut that we're not murderers and have never killed another person in our lives, which then causes him to get angry and attack us. We punch him right in the fungus hole and end Glut's sovereignty forever. After all the fighting, we take another rest at camp, but we just get a little too hot and bothered over the corpse we just so happened to find in our camp last time that we had nothing to do with. The silly little goblin butler guy comes over and gives us a free cape for being such a model citizen. For some reason this cape is called the Deathstalker mantle, which is ironic considering we've never caused a death in our entire lives. We're also not even stalkers. This game is broken, absolutely unplayable, 0 out of 10. On the bright side, this cape is so important to this run that it essentially enabled us to trivialize several fights in the game, and it's basically the main reason why I decided to use the Dark Urge. Once per turn, the cape allows you to go invisible after killing an enemy, and that invisibility lasts about 2 turns, which initially I thought as a solo character, I figured it'd just give me some extra time to reposition and recover unless I got caught. But more on that later. We made our way back to the Dwergar camp and took their boat down to the Grimmforge. We then met up with some Dwergar fellows and convinced them we were on their side, and made our way up to where Nier was trapped behind some rocks. To free him, we basically just need to throw some smoke powder bombs onto the rocks, but doing so would likely put us in a fight surrounded by tons of other Dwergar that we would be extremely unlikely to win. So the first thing I did was opt to weaken the Dwergar side by shoving a few of them off a cliff in stealth, along with the scrying eye that was patrolling around there, because otherwise it would call for backup. However, after attempting a third dwarf yeet and delete, I got caught in the act, and had to start fighting my way out. I start off by finishing my throw and bestow with death into the abyss on the third dwarf. I then realized that I'm far more outnumbered than I thought I would be. I then hid behind a wall where they couldn't shoot me and waited for them to approach me, and it's here that we get to see what the Deathstalker mantle is truly capable of. The invisibility that you trigger with the Deathstalker mantle can be a little finicky. It doesn't always do what it's supposed to do. However, in this fight, I discovered something that was pretty game-changing for the rest of the run. When you're the only character left on your side and the enemy can't find you because you're invisible, they straight up just end up leaving combat. The enemy has a small chance to find you if you stay around the same place, but that's really easy to avoid, and they have a small chance to do so. From here, with my newfound power, I started taking out the dwarves with no issues whatsoever, dispatching them one at a time with my divine fists of justice, and eventually the dwarves were dealt with. All that was left was us, some gnomes, and some rocks that needed to be blown up. This fight did make me think about my current rule set, however, so as a result, I decided to add somewhat of a personal guideline going forward. It seemed a little too broken to be able to just leave combat whenever I wanted to, so if combat ended because I was invisible, I would just attack the nearest target ASAP. It did give me a huge advantage in fights still, but the Deathstalker mantle is just too fun to not use. The gist of it is I would just try to avoid hit and run tactics. After clarifying that, I decided to free Nier from his rocky tomb. This gave us an extra brain slug point to give us new mind powers. Afterwards, I kill Nier myself and then take his brain slug for another point. With all of that done, there was only one more thing to do in the Grimmforge. I made my way to the adamantine forge using some enhanced jumps to skip some puzzles. I took out the animated armors that were in the area, grabbed the monk amulet that was being protected by the lava elemental, which can give us 2 key points every day, and did another meet and greet with some methods to grab the mithril behind them. And with that, we were essentially ready to face the end boss of the act, Grimm. Grimm has a special mechanic where he's only able to be damaged for 2 turns after he's been exposed to lava, and there's also a valve in the arena that lets you pour lava onto the floor as well. We did have somewhat of an advantage here, given that Grimm is weak to bludgeoning damage, and our fists are basically rocks. However, Grimm would still end up putting up a fight. We weren't able to kill Grimm in the 2 turns that he's initially vulnerable, so as a result, we essentially had to lure the construct away and fill the arena back up with lava. This ended up being somewhat of a struggle because Grimm would end up killing me if he caught me too early. It would take several tries, but eventually I was able to get into a perfect situation where Grimm didn't smash my face into the pavement before I made him vulnerable. After dealing with Grimm's garbage for a few times too many, I finally smashed his construct ass into the sidewalk and promptly took my well-deserved trophies. With that done, we're able to make 2 pieces of adamantium gear. Despite being a monk, we will end up using medium armor and a shield later on, so I ended up opting to get the adamantium shield as well as the adamantium armor. With Grimm down, we were well on our way to finishing out the act and moving on, but there was still a couple of things to clean up, and by couple, I specifically mean Ethel. I needed to head back and finish her quest so that I could get a permanent stat boost from her. I punched an old lady in her home, and this summons some swamp police to come knocking on the door to take me away. I ward off the police with my punches of justice and head back into the dastardly old lady's home to send her back to the nursing home from whence she came. Ethel heads deeper into the home and we pursue her accordingly, getting past her wooden door of many mysteries and defeating her assortment of masked children. After finding our way to the deepest parts of her lair, we find some lady trapped in a cage and more importantly Ethel. Now the fight itself with Ethel turned out to be somewhat of a puzzle. Ethel summons a bunch of clones in the fight, and they can all cast Ray of Sickness and Hold Person on you. However, this makes it a little more difficult because we're a solo character and we can't really take them all out in one turn. If all the clones converge on us, then we're basically dead. I got around this by casting the Scroll of Darkness on the floor and then hiding inside of the darkness. The darkness itself breaks all line of sight to my character, so nobody could actually shoot into it. With that, I would just leave the darkness every time I needed to take a pot shot and end my turn inside of the darkness so they couldn't hit me. Once I dispelled Ethel's Shadow Clone Jutsu, I was ready to take on the old hag myself. So I went up to her and started punching. And after enough punching, she offered to give me a permanent +1 dexterity bonus to my stats. And finally, with that done, we were ready to leave Act 1 for good. I do some final shopping and we head over to the mountain pass where the journey into the Githyanki Kresh and the Shadow Curse lands awaited us. If you've made it this far in the video, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. I've never made like a long video of this type, so I figured I'd give it a try and see how it went. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and feel free to subscribe if you want. You can also always catch me on Twitch. I usually stream nights, and I'll have links in the description for all that stuff. I'll do my best to keep making videos. Appreciate you sticking out for this long, and hope you have a good day. Alright, bye.